All right, thank you everybody for joining. Danny, just really quick before you start. Last year we had a presentation on flows at the beginning of the year. It's been about 18 months. And I know somebody always asks me, we're architect group, why are we talking about flows? Flows are pretty amazing. And if you know how to use them, they are a really great part to put as part of your solution. Just this month, Brian and I deployed a project that uses a whole litany of screen flows, auto launch flows, and record trigger flows for a really important project that we did. Eventually, I might share some more about it. But definitely, when Danny was posting on LinkedIn about a lot of the knowledge he has for flows, I reached out to him. He was very willing to share his knowledge, which is why we're here today. And so if you have any questions at the end, we'll have time for discussion. And then as always, bring it up to why do you want to use flows? It's not just an admin topic. I think it is. And that will come more together. So Danny, if you want to start sharing, you can take over and share us about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Let me share my screen. All right, I'm in slide mode. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
I entered slide mode. Can you see the screen, my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks for the introduction, Marlene. I'm Danny. I'm working at a company called BConnect as a consultant and application architect. I'm really into flows and all other kinds of things in Salesforce. So I started posting on LinkedIn, and that's how Marlene got to me. So you're welcome. I put my LinkedIn right here at the bottom. You're very welcome to follow and get some more content in the future. So today's presentation, we're going to talk about advanced features of flows. And this is the idea. The purpose is not to do you a step-by-step guide of how to do things, but just to expose you to all kinds of possibilities and to see what use cases you can make out of it. Okay, the demos I prepared are made up completely and maybe like bad examples, but it's just to convey a message, convey the purpose and the possibilities. So this is what we have on our agenda. We're going to talk about how to beautify flows, mostly, obviously, screen flows, and invoke Apex. Those two I'm gonna do one combined demo just to get a taste of what it means. We're gonna use a REST API within flows. Don't worry, I'm not a developer. I'm not gonna use any complicated jargon or anything like that. We're going to talk about asynchronous paths. So this is not the right order. The security is last. And I hope we'll get there because we have a lot of things to cover and just 45 minutes. So maybe I will have to stop in the middle, and then you can either see the presentation on your own, or reach out, or wait till I post on it on LinkedIn. So let's get started. So flows, screen flows, the standard ones, if you just take the standard component and throw them into screen components, it can be a little bit dull, just like write buttons or fields that you need to populate. Very, very simple, but it doesn't have to be. You can use all kinds of tricks, basically using SLDS, which is stands for Salesforce Lightning Design Systems. The developers, if there are any here, are most likely familiar with this because this is the base for any custom Lightning Web component or any custom component that you use in the UI. But it's not entirely for developers only. You can take it and use it and put it into screen flows, and it will be much prettier. You can, for example, I put here a background that looks like a toast. You can have it green, you can have it red if it's an error. You can use orange if it's an alert, and so on, like any other component that you're familiar with. Okay, so this is when you use SLDS. It's basically Salesforce made up, not made up, but pre-made components that you can use and embed in Salesforce screen flows or Lightning Web Components. So this is one way to do that, and I'll show you in a minute in the demo. Another one, and I put here the link to the all other components. The other way is the style override, which is it's a package, a managed package that you can install, and then it basically gives you so much more capabilities to override the CSS. And I'll just say CSS is a living hell if you're not familiar with it, or even if you're familiar with it and don't master it, it can be a living hell. So you need to be very careful with that and have some background with CSS, not much, but obviously I put here a link to a Salesforce Time blog, which guides how to do it step by step and gives you some kind, pre-built CSS scripts that you can use. It's not that complicated. Just it can be tricky. So you better go with it if you have some background with CSS. That's what I'm trying to say. And what I did on this slide here, you can see that the background changed completely. And instead of white, like here, it has a background image. And this is just like one example. You can color the text. You can widen the model. That is something that many people like, that the model of when you click a button, open the flown model, it can be bigger, more higher and broader, and so on. So it can be, there are many use cases for this. And I'll show you now this demo, how it looks on the screen flow. So this is a screen flow with just one screen of the input. And I put here a button, action button, which is a new feature of the latest release that triggers a subflow. That this is our second topic, the invocable Apex method, but I'll get to it in a minute. And what it does is check if the enter time is between business hours. So if I go to business hour, I define to this organization, this developer org, business hours, which are Eastern and Monday to Friday, with all kinds of, you see, Monday is till 5 p.m., Tuesday is till 9 p.m., and so on and so on. So this is the subflow, which I'll get to it in a minute. But you can see that I had it added here that if it's a success, by success, I mean the daytime entered is between business hours, it shows you this display text component. And if it's failure, it shows you this one. And you can see that I have here a text component, text variable, which I'll show you. There's nothing, it's just like the standard display text. The only thing different that makes it with a background is this text variable. And if I go to the text variable itself, you can see that it's an HTML snippet, which has this SLDS styling. Okay, so this class makes the display text on the screen component have a green background. And this is just, again, this is just one example. You can do whatever you want with it. If I go now to I put it in opportunity record page just so it will be somewhere hosted easily. And I'll do right now 6:29. So we are Tuesday, and it's 6:30 p.m. Let's see if it's a business hour. So Tuesday, yes, it is. So I'll do check, and it's success. Now I'll change it to, let's say, 9:45 p.m. and it's not on the business hours, so it gives you a different coloring. So this is one way to enhance your screen flows. And another thing that I wanted to show you is this is the first version. The second version, I'm going to activate it now. Sorry, I'm going to refresh this. The second version has the CSS managed package override. Okay, I'm not sure why it doesn't let me. I'll save a new version. So before I do that, you can see here that I added this component, style override, and it has only one input, which is a text variable. And you can see that I put here this is specific component. Again, this is CSS, and it can scare a little bit, but check out the resources and you'll be fine. So I put this image here as a background, and you can see now that when I activate this and I refresh the page, the same component now has the CSS. Or not. Okay, this is a demo. Something has to go wrong. But I'm not sure, but I guess you'll have to believe me from the image I took earlier. So, okay, this was the styling. Now, I wanted to show you also the invocable Apex method that right here we have this button that triggers the auto launch flow. So I'll open it, and you can see it basically has just one thing it does. And this is the invocable Apex method. And the reason I used Apex method because flow has limitations. Okay, it's not perfect. And checking if a date is between hours, it doesn't, the capability doesn't exist in flow. There's no object business hours that you can query. And if I'm not sure, maybe there is. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. But even if there is no method to check if a specific time is between those. So this has to be Apex class. And you can see here, this is something I put up to get like in, I don't know, 30 minutes with the help of ChatGPT. And I'm not a developer. So it takes some input, daytime, and returns if it's business hour. And it uses specific method that has only exists in Apex, which is business hours dot is within. So this is what I'm doing here in this flow, and it passes back the output to the parent flow, which is the button on the screen flow. Yeah, this is the demo I want to show related to the invocable method. But the thing is, the beauty of invocable method is that you can combine those two worlds of declarative tool of flows and Apex, which there's a lot of discussions on the community of what is better, which architecture, what method should you use all the time. It doesn't have to be either that or that. It can be a combination, and this is a great example of taking one specific action or capability that is currently limited in flow, put it into Apex, and then continue in a declarative tool. And it also can be the other way around, right? You can have, for example, if you want to schedule a process every 1 minute or every 5 minutes, that's something that right now you cannot do in a flow. Schedule flows are limited to a daily or weekly, and that's it. So if you want something that is run every 5 minutes, you can create an auto launch and launch it from an Apex scheduled class. So that was it. I'll keep on going. Any questions about this section so far? Great. So I see on the chat, let's see if the styling in the text template can only be added if the CSS package installed. Well, the styling in the text template can be always created as a text variable, but if you want it to be applied, you have to put it into this manage package, because this is what does the overriding. Okay, great. So let's move on. So invoke flow through API. We are recently Salesforce added the capability to do API callouts, post and get. Right, this is a new component on flows. This is not what I want to talk about. I'm talking about calling flows through API from external system, which right now, what's more common is to invoke some kind of Apex class that has a REST features, like it's enabled to receive information through HTTP API callout. I'm not talking about that. In a flow, you have a custom URL, which you can, with a flow API name, you can put it here. So in this example that I'm going to show you in a minute, my flow called demo create account contact, blah, 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 and have the prefix of the environment. I defined the variables that I want to pass to the flow, and I made sure they are available for input in the flow. And once you have the authorization, then you can invoke it directly from API callout. So I'll show you how it looks like on Postman. Again, I'm not a developer. This is very light development. And Postman is a software that you can trigger all kinds of API callouts. So I'm going to use this to show you the demo, basically. I already ran it, but I'll run it again. And I'm sending the request. External system sends the information to Salesforce to this endpoint, which is the flow that I created. And you can see you have here is success, true. It gives you the response that the process finished. So what you can see, the process basically is you have those variables, first name, last name, domain name. This is just something random for the demo, for demoing purposing. And it creates an account and then creates a contact from the information received. So you can see now that it was finished. I refresh the accounts, and we have first name test, last name test, which is the account created. And if I go to the related, you can see the contact. Okay, so it was invoked from outside of Salesforce. And it has many uses because it has a lot of implications as well. You need to be very, very on top of the user permissions and what it can do, because it can get you can expose information and data you don't want to, but we'll talk about it on the security part. So that's for invoking flow through API. Any questions about this one?
How did you handle the security with that? Or is there a recommendation of handling the authorization for calling that, or?
Yeah, so to use API, you need a connected app. So on the connected app, you have all kinds of security settings that you can define. On top of that, it's based on a user. So it's based on a user. That means permissions as a user for objects, fields, and record access. So we need to make sure your API user, the user that you use for API, has only the access that you want to. This is best practice since ever, but lately, well, not lately, but about a year ago, Salesforce also introduced API license, which helps this to maintain this granular permission based on the need, and not like what used to be one user with system admin profile with a lot of permissions, privileged user. So that's basically it. You need to make sure the user has only the access he needs to, and make sure the connected app has the right settings based on the integration.
And so Danny, thank you for sharing that example that is calling Salesforce. Earlier I mentioned that we just deployed a project, and it's a little bit similar, but our ScreenFlow does an outbound call. And so let's say you're renting a car from Hertz and you have a flat tire. So you won't get a flat tire, but it happens, right? And you call. And so when you call, those agents are going to be using Salesforce. They're going to ask you, what's your rental agreement number? They put that in there, that's doing an outbound web call, just like we just saw here, to go say, great, what car did you rent, where did you get it? And it gets a whole bunch of information from the back into Salesforce. Before they even have to manually type a whole bunch of that information, now it's being done through the service, right? And so that's a good example of from Salesforce calling something out from a screen flow. And so that's one of the things that we did. The very first thing it asks you is, do you know your driver's your plate or your VIN or your rental agreement? You need to know where you're driving, right? So you can help you. But I just want to give you that example that it can also be outbound flows or this inbound scenario is interesting.
Yeah, and for security purposes, just like Cole stated, we were one of those who had a lot of service accounts on the system admin profile. It's because whoever set it up that way, it was easier. And we've now migrated most of our service users to the Salesforce API license, and then using permission sets, just making sure that the permission sets we're using on a Salesforce license space. Otherwise, you're going to get an error message and it's going to force you to remove those permission sets. So we've designed from the ground up permission sets specifically for these users, just to limit the access and things like that. There's a lot of security visibility now at Hertz, for especially new projects, because they go through a large committee, and it's worked well actually, because now it's just like you're getting an error for which object, which field. Oh, well, that wasn't part of your access. You needed why? Okay, well, let's talk about it. And versus it going under the radar and unseen until something breaks, and then they're like, why did they have access to that?
Yeah.
I'm out of here. But
Definitely. And I have some more things about security coming up, so we can expand this conversation there. Somebody asked, Christine asked, would name credentials work here? So name credentials are used for calling out from Salesforce to other systems. So this we're talking about, and this example is the other way around. So name credentials is not necessary for this purpose. All right, asynchronous flows. So I'm gonna give a little bit of background. I have this table here that shows the capabilities. This is from Salesforce Architect's blog or webpage. I'll put the link here later. And you see that you have more and more capabilities as you move from low code to pro code, and pro code, they mean Apex, basically. So one of the things that what's used to, the biggest advantage of Apex used to be asynchronous. Well, not the only, but one of them was asynchronous, which gives you a lot of much bigger government limits and capabilities, quantity of records, processing of records, and so on and so on. And now Salesforce not in the couple of latest releases, added capabilities to Flow as well. And I want to go over and see that here, and you can see. Okay, so yeah, talk about. So what's the idea behind this? Is the asynchronous process is to improve performance. And before you go to asynchronous, you need to think what is the purpose of the process, because sometimes you need it synchronous. You need it right there, right now. For example, there's another process that depends on the completion of process A. Process B is triggered and has some conditioning based on the outcome of process A. So if you have a delay on process A, maybe process B will fail. So first of all, think of that. And here I talk about the difference between after save and before save, which you probably heard it a lot of times. Before save is way more efficient, and if you can do that, you use that. So just understand how better that is. You can see that after save and process builder are, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, 7 times than after save Apex, and I don't know, 10 times, 100 times more than before save Flow. So inside that, the synchronous, use the before save if you can, and the after save if you have to use some related objects or send emails and so on, some other post transaction actions. And the reason for that is because the order of execution affects before save and after save severely. So before save, it's the name implies what it does. It's before save, before the Salesforce order of execution commits the changes to the database. So there's no save that's triggered from the change of the record. While in after save, if you do have a change, you have to trigger save again. You have to commit the change again. So you see there's a whole loop that's being triggered just because of this after save update. So before save is way more efficient. And because Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment, it enforces governance. And I mentioned it before, but now to understand a little bit better why we need asynchronous paths, we need to understand governance limits. And basically, Salesforce tries to protect itself, the infrastructure, all its customer by limiting each one of the customers to a specific resource usage. So you can have only those are limits for flow. So for example, you can have 1,000 interviews per hour, or 20,000 combined total of automation that started or assumed based on records field value, and so on and so on. 250,000 scheduled trigger flows per 24 hours. So there's a limitation on flows. And there's limitation on the organization, not as flow, but for all transactions, no matter what source they're coming from. So you have SOCL queries, you have DML statements, and so on, those are quite known. So, for example, you can see that since asynchronous path it's telling Salesforce, okay, I don't have to use it right now. Whenever the system is ready, is capable of dealing with transaction, do it then. The advantage of this is Salesforce can take the time, and allocate resource more efficiently. What cannot be done on synchronous path, because on synchronous path you have to, on the command of saving, it has to be completed. Well, synchronous is not so. So Salesforce grants you bigger limits to complete because of that, because it basically uses resources more in a smarter way. So instead of 100 stock requests, you have 200. Instead of I think I got it wrong here. I copied it wrong. But for example, the biggest one is CPU time limit, which is
At the bottom.
this one here, maximum CPU time on Salesforce services. So it's 10 seconds on synchronous and 60 seconds on asynchronous. Sometime when you have a lot of data to process, this can be very, very significant. Okay, so I'll skip this one. So what happens if you hit the limits? Well, all operations are rolled back, and any operation that access external data aren't rolled back. Okay, so if something already happened, it happened. It cannot roll back. So it can be very, very dangerous. Think about it. If you have a process that A, B, C, D, while C is a communication with the external system, and then at D you fail, D to A rolls back in Salesforce, but C is not. You already committed to the external system. So it can do a lot of damage in some organizations and databases. So those, to summarize it, benefits of synchronous processing and downsides, you have minimal data transaction on synchronous. So because it happens one after the other, it has a consistent rollbacks, and it has process dependency. So it guarantees that the required result is available immediately within the same transaction. The downside of synchronous is what we just talked about, the limits, basically. Time window. Well, synchronous is not guaranteed to be executed immediately. It can be 1 second after, 30 seconds after. Usually it's within a reasonable amount of time. It's not like half an hour later, but it's a few seconds, but there's no guarantee and there's no consistency. Support for external objects and callouts. So in general, any access to external system that needs to wait for response will be too long to do that within the original open transaction. That's not completely true, but it is recommended to separating callouts into asynchronous paths because it can take time to receive the response based on the system that receives the callout. And mixed DML, maybe you encountered this. You cannot do DML. You cannot update, for example, objects that are considered setup and non-setup. So, for example, you cannot update a contact and a user in the same transaction. You have to separate them. That's a Salesforce limitation. So in practice, how do you use async? There are 3 ways. One is adding async path to a record triggered flow. And you have this checkbox at the bottom of the start element, which creates this path, run asynchronously. And this path I didn't find anywhere in the documentation that confirms that, but it's most likely, if I want to compare it to Apex, it's going to be queuable. Which is scheduled as soon as possible and not on a specific time. Usually, again, it's within a second it's being done most of the time, but it's not guaranteed. Second option is to add, yeah?
Sorry, no, that's a really good point. I don't know if these are queuables, because queuables you can chain, but it's a really good question about how these asynchronous jobs.
Don't they go to the flow interviews?
Yeah, but a queuable job, you can chain them together, you can design what order you're gonna run in. With flows and synchronous, you can't do that. So I wonder if it lives somewhere in the middle. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going deep into.
No, I know what you're saying.
The add future method of the past is probably better than that future, but it's not as controllable as a queuable job. So I think it's a really good question, Danny, and now I'm curious, and I want to find out. But I did want to add the asynchronous path, the SLA for sales 20 minutes. So if you're willing to wait 20 minutes for this to occur, it's considered asynchronous. If it's beyond 20 minutes, you can open a case for Salesforce, then it's considered SLA. But like you said, almost always it runs in seconds, but it could be up to 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's their protection for network.
But I am curious how these run, like you said.
They prioritize it.
Well, the queuable, the thing about the queuable is you can pass through the whole object, which is why I think, Danny, you said that. But you can organize them and chain them. You can't do that with flows. It's a great question. I would love to explore it and get an answer, but I'll move on.
The same.
In queuable, you can
Yes.
chain. I don't think you have to chain, right? It's like
No,
a
you don't.
feature that
No,
you
you
can
don't.
use. But in flows, I guess it's a queuable that you don't have this kind of element that you can queue and chain something. But if there's async path flow that is triggered from a previous async flow, like one triggers the other, it's gonna work fine. So there's no limitation of that. It's not really chaining, right? But it's as close as possible.
Then you're you got one.
Can you run, so from this asynchronous path, can you run another one? I know
Yeah.
you can link auto launch flows.
I mean,
Queuable.
this is a record triggered,
Yeah.
right? This is the record triggered. So you cannot, you need to do another DML to that
Mhm.
on another flow. That will be the condition to run the second flow with asynchronous path. But you can't really schedule here. You need to create a new flow with the conditions.
Thank you.
Question on the chat: can you set variables in the immediate path to pull to the async path? So unfortunately, that's right now it's not possible. And also, you cannot access the previous values. So if you update asynchronous, if you update the record and want to trigger an asynchronous path, you have to use, I'll show you, it's called, here, this is a flow. And if I change it to updated, okay, I'll put the count. Here, only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirement. So you cannot use isChange, for example. The path has to run when specific conditions are met, not when any change triggers it. So if you, for example, even if I change it to formula and then I do isChange some value, this will not work. The flow builder will give you an error. So to answer a question, you cannot access any values or variables, or even the previous record, which is what's it called, prior. All right, so that was the first way. The second way is scheduled path to record trigger. So it's the same start element. You can also add here under this section a scheduled path, which you can decide, you can define what are the conditions. So you have all kinds of scenarios here. If I go back to the flow builder and add here, you see, I click plus, and then I go with 1 minute after, and you can select the time source. Any datetime field should be shown here. So I'll use create a date, offset number 1, and you have all kinds of options. 1 month after, month before, day after, day before, and so on, up until minute. And the really good stuff, the great part about scheduled path that you don't have in asynchronous path is this one, the batch size. Sometimes when you have very complicated orgs or very old orgs that have a lot of technical debt, and then you add on top of that another process that consumes a lot of either CPU or need to process a lot of records or all kinds of other limitations, you want to narrow down the amount of records being processed every batch. And this is the way you can do this in a flow. If you don't touch this, if the default is 200 records, so if you create 10,000 records to run on asynchronous path, this also can fail sometime. Depends on what other processes are invoked. But if you can change it to just one or 10 or whatever to downsize it, this is a great workaround to many limitations. Yeah, so this is the second way. And the third way is what you all know as scheduled triggered flow, which is also asynchronous. It runs on a specific date and time. You can set up the frequency, weekly, monthly, or just once. And the limitations here is that it's not triggered based on condition. It's triggered based on time, right? So those are the three ways. Another question. Okay, I found a batch that is running one record at a time. We're looking to see how much we can increase it before hitting CPU or over limits. Yeah.
I'm just not sure why we created a batch to run one record at a time. So.
There are those dogs.
It's a very well written
Okay.
job. It's just only running one record.
Does it fail if you?
So,
Or gonna go with it.
A bad trigger.
how much time we have left, Merlin?
So we started about 6:20, so maybe 5 more minutes and then we have some discussions. We probably pick your brain.
Okay.
That's right.
So I'll try to show you this. You know what? I'll just run to the demo because I want you to, and then you can see the presentation later on. I want to show you how dangerous flows can be, especially on a community, when you use run a system, because this is common practice and it's very, very dangerous without understanding the consequences of it. So you are most likely, some of you familiar with how to run the flow. You have three options: user or system context, which is defined based on who triggered it. And if you use this, this is the safest. So if a user doesn't have access to some field, then he will not see this field. If he doesn't have access to a record, he will not see the record. That's the best scenario, security-wise. Sometimes you have guest users on Experience Cloud, or you have users that you don't want to give them access except one specific process or scenario. So you can use one of those. And I'm going to show you now, if I use the system context without sharing, how I can access all kinds of things that I shouldn't see in a community. So I have a process here that, again, it's not a real scenario, just something to show you the purpose of this demo. It gets all accounts, right? Because ID is not null, it gets all accounts. And then it clones the account and displays the output. And the reason I clone the account is just because I want to show you the, where is it? Accounts cloned. This collection is available for output. And to see the selection screen here, it's just a data table showing the accounts. Okay, nothing. But the thing is, we have here a get accounts with all with how to store records data, automatically store all fields, right? So there's no definition, and this is the most common scenario. Most admins building flows will use this setting, automatically store all fields, and then it's cloning it and displaying. So if I go now to my community site here, and you see this is the output, right? 13 accounts, and again, I'm not a developer, and I can, through the developer console of the Google Chrome, see what's going on those accounts, what other fields are not being exposed on this on the layout. So if I go to network, I'm going to refresh this, and you can see now here it shows you all requests from the database, and I'm going to show this one, okay? And again, you don't have to understand what I'm doing. I don't understand completely as well. But the thing is, now you can see the data table, all those accounts here with way more fields than what is being displayed on the data table. Here you have only 6 fields, and you can see here you have billing latitude, status, description, partner, and so on and so on. And even sensitive information like SLA expiration, SLA level, and I don't know, whatever you put here on the account can be shown if the flow uses God mode, how I call it, right? System context without sharing, and the available for output is checked true. So there's no filtering whatsoever what's being defined. And if I just to show you like one way, this is not the best practice, just one way to deal with it. I'm gonna activate this flow, which now the difference in this flow is that I put, you see here, choose fields and let Salesforce do the rest. And I define exactly the fields that I want to show on the data table. And I don't use the automatic store of fields. I'm going to activate this version and refresh the page. And you can see that on the UI, the same fields are being displayed. There's no problem with that. But here, all the accounts are showing only the fields that are being retrieved and not all fields. So that's one way to deal with this God mode option in Salesforce flows. Yeah, so imagine what a real hacker can do with this community sites. And that's it. So I have all kinds of other things I wanted to show you related to security, but I'm gonna now hand it back to Merlin.
Well, definitely, I'm gonna open it up to everybody in the room and online. What questions do you guys have? Anything that you guys have done with flows that you want to talk about? Anything? I'm gonna pick on Brian.
Why?
That's fine.
I didn't finish eating, no, but.
I do have one addition. New in this summer is the ability to select an account when you're testing scheduled flows or a record. That is so long time coming. So you don't have to schedule the flow to test it. You can test it on a specific account. It used to automatically grab whatever account it deemed it wanted, and it always used it.
So extending the debug feature of regular, like,
Yeah,
the flow.
Yeah.
Into the scheduled flow. That's neat.
yeah, very convenient.
We use them a lot for, coupled with name credentials for API calls. We call, get a list, select a list. And that has reduced the development time, and we can handle a lot of stuff to admins versus developers. So that's a big benefit of it. But the key was adding it with name credentials and the model that they have there. So when you get a response back, it's really helps.
And I would say to add to that, like, we partnered with Slalom on this big project, and so a lot of the implementations that we did, even the call-outs and things like that, to Marty's point, we're using flows, right? And I think a part of that is the simplicity of being able to maintain it, right? So like, we're a small team internally, and so being able to maintain that moving forward. So the point that if we had a senior admin, we can give it to the admin. As of right now, we typically just have developers that would work on it, but it makes it easier to maintain. It's not like, updating an Apex class where you have to, create a new test unit for it, and make sure that the test class, passes and things like that. And one thing that I like about flows, although we have a CI/CD tool, we have Pupado for rollbacks, is that you can roll back the flow itself, right? You can go back to the prior version pretty quickly, stop the destruction in production, and then work on a true, rollback, right? And we've had to do that, yeah. And so I love that, right? Like, because it, the biggest thing in an emergency is stop the fire, right? And then try to, figure out, okay, what happened here? And so that's one of the things that I really like about flows. And I will say, I was an admin in 2003 in Salesforce, and eventually when I hit flows before the interface change, it was very intimidating to get into, right? And so it was almost like you needed to know code. And now it's so much easier, like it's more inviting, and there's a lot of guides. Even like the UI itself, it kind of guides you through what you need to do. And to your point, Danny, it's all about the imagination. Like, what am I trying to do here? What is my use case? What are my scenarios? And then, obviously the solutions might be a bit more complex, but if you have the idea, the thought process, you can almost get to where you need to go. Very little help. It's always just happens, like Marlene and this group.
I do have a question around your select all fields comment. When you're choosing a get records or assigning them specific variables. In my experience, when you assign specific variables, if I'm looking at a flow that you designed, I'm going through hell trying to figure out where all the elements are because you're referencing variables. Now I got to hunt and peck. I got to open everything up to figure out where it is. Whereas when I do a get records, I give it a label and I get all the data. So the first advantage is I can look at my flow. I can look at the labels, and I've got a really good idea of what's happening with that flow without opening anything up. But I thought that when I chose to get all fields, when you go into debug, I say, get this account and get all fields. And then later I'm using the ID and I'm using the account email. If I go into debug mode, I don't see it grabbing everything. I see it grabbing specifically that ID and that email. And so I thought, even though I'm asking for it all, it's only getting what I need. But now you showed in your demo, the entire account and all the fields are accessible. So that was new.
Salesforce goes over sorry, I was saying that Salesforce goes over the flow on the back end and sees what are required. And in my flow, what I did, I cloned an account, and cloning is taking all fields and putting in the new variable. So it depends on what's going on in the flow itself. But obviously, again, I'm not a developer or a hacker. Somebody can easily add a request for additional fields or whatever and extract that if you don't restrict it from the beginning.
And I think there's also, there's two levels, right? Is the flow running on God mode? Yes, it has access to everything, so that's one threshold you need to look at. But the next one is when you select the fields that you're talking about, you have, give me all fields, or let me select the fields, but not create variables. Or number three, let me select the fields and assign it to variables. I think the third one is the most specific, and that's the one that you're talking about, is when you have to go hunt.
That's the one I hate.
everything. And so if you go all the way to that granularity, you're gonna have to figure out either it's a very well descriptively named flow that you know where everything is, or you have really good documentation, or you're gonna hunt and peck, right? The middle layer of saying, let me pick the fields with Salesforce does the rest,
Right.
will give you that flexibility of still being specific. I just want these fields and not having to go hunt and peck. So maybe there's somewhere in the middle. And then a couple more security things to keep in mind is auto launch flows tend to run with God permissions. So one of the things that we do for auto launch flows is there has to be a handshake between whatever is calling that auto launch flow and the auto launch flow. If it doesn't pass a valid interview ID, we stop it. It doesn't matter that it has God mode and it can just run and return everything. That handshake for us means that something is calling it that it shouldn't be calling it, and we're going to stop it in its tracks. So there's other things you can do to make sure that when you're putting together your solution, you're making sure each step is what's calling it is have permission to call it. Yes, great.
Should it see it?
It should continue. Just because you want to make sure that that happens. And I know you probably have this in your presentation, Nani, but security, right? If you check the flow permission on the user, now they can run any flow in your org. That opens up security. If you only assign a flow to a permission set that a user can run, then I can say Brian can run these 3 flows, but Ryan can only run 2 other ones, right? Because that way you're also separating the permissions. So there's lots of little things you can do to make sure your flow is only granting access to the person that it's supposed to do what it's supposed to be doing. A
Yeah.
lot of times people will just open it up, and that's where Danny's point of you can make it easy, but easy also makes it open.
You can call it go, but you can also call it ignorant mode, because then you don't know better and that's what you do.
So if the records are queried and we don't actually assign them to a variable, they would be available, they would not be available, is that the
If
thing?
you query them in the get, they're available. And I think one of the differences that you saw Danny do is he was using Postman to pull it, right? Because flows are code, right? We always say Salesforce has done a magnificent job at saying
No code, no code.
load code,
But it's
no
not true.
code. But
It's the
honestly,
background.
they're
Here you go,
gonna
go.
be- you saw them call it from an external source to create an account, right? It's code, but it's doing a lot of things in the background. And that's why he can pull and see all the fields, because of the way he was calling it in the backend. So he wasn't using the debug mode of flow, but he was calling it from the back.
And Joe, what I would say is that, and this is something that, especially working with a third party, one of the things that we emphasize on, especially with flow, is like, specifically in decision trees, add comments. You know, what are you deciding here? Because you go in there and to your point, you're like, what is this? You know, what is this in the decision? What is this variable and things like that? And so that's one of the things we emphasize on requiring, but also, and decision elements and things like that, like adding fault paths, right? Am I doing a get? Is there a possibility that I get a null value back? If I do, what do I do at that point? You know, flow errors are not pretty and quite difficult to deal with. So we do that, and I'll let you speak in a minute. But I think it goes back to like from the starting point, security measures. Do you have a service user that you can use for this? Do you have the right permission sets? Do you have them defined down to the field levels that you want to restrict to? Like we just had an ETL user that we created, and they only have access to specific fields, read only. In some cases, they have access to update one field, which is like a flagging field and things like that. Like so, very granular to restrict access, because before it was just like free for all because it's easy. It's I got something else to do, and we do it, and that's now, at least with the new stuff we've done, made it so much easier to maintain. And security is happy with us, which is, it helps not get stuff up. You were gonna say something?
Yeah, in terms of, you had said fall pass, where I mostly just do record trigger flows. I haven't had the opportunity to do that many screen flows. So my exposure has been record trigger flows. And what I do, if I do a get, I immediately do a decision after it to determine if I found any records or not. If I didn't find any records, then abort. Most of the time it's abort or skip something or something like that. And I still use the fault pass, but I don't know, it just seems like a decision that says, if this is no, stop, is to me more straightforward and preventative than relying on the fault.
The issue I have there is I can't troubleshoot that. Right, with the fault path, we have custom API figure logs and things like that. We have an invocable Apex that we designed so that it captures like the body and like specific errors of what we're getting back. Otherwise, you're gonna get a high level error in an email, if that. And so then it's hard to troubleshoot when an agent says, hey, every time I go here, I'm getting this error message. And so in this fault path, we're purposely documenting key points that are gonna, help us get to the issue within a few minutes versus spending a few hours, trying to recreate it and sometimes that's not feasible, right? It's like when you're presenting, working before and then you're gonna present and you encounter an issue. It's almost, like that, right? And so it's something that we discover at least in our org. We have a ton of data and the complexities are quite large, and so it just works better. And we're a small team, so we don't have the flexibility or the advantage of having a lot of time to figure things out. So
One of the guides I have for the developers and admins is the hard entry into the flows with the record, especially if the record trigger flows, by having a record type and then either 3 or 4 variables of what did this record change to? Because in the guts of processing, especially we have one object that has 20 flows that will execute, and just by design and evolution of the system, by having it stop at the hard entry point, you're eliminating processing time, and
Yes.
it really it speeds it up on it. When we
Yes.
did that, we noticed a significant visual effect by doing that. So that's when all right, what's your hard entry criteria, especially the record type, really helps.
The entry criteria on the record trigger flow. Yeah, I use that a lot.
Yeah.
But doing that, you end up, the downside of it is you could end up creating a lot more flows than if you didn't.
Yeah.
But by having that entry criteria, what you end up doing is you have your flows, you might have a lot of flows, but they end up being smaller. They're not nearly as complicated. So they're easier to debug if you have an issue. At least that's what I've seen.
And I think as long as you're having mutually exclusive entry criteria.
Yes, yeah.
Mutually exclusive.
But wait, there's more.
And also make sure you have a bypass for all your flows, right? Because maybe you're doing a mass data migration or something went wrong and you need to do something, just make sure you have a user that's able to bypass your flows easily through metadata or custom permissions, would be preferred, just to make sure that it gives you flexibility.
we do a lot of as part of our new delivery design the ideas, when we switched over to Capado. A lot of the win for us was being able to stand up multiple sandboxes, and like we did 18 sandboxes in 2 days, totally seeded, test data from production, anonymized. That a lot of that is impossible without bypass, because as you're seeding, it'll take forever to seed. And so when we do that, we are using our own platform, so we disable all automations and rules, and it just boom. So I cloned one sandbox from prod because we had this huge project that we had so many things to push down, and it was not possible. So I cloned one sandbox, seeded it fully, reconfigured all the endpoints so that they're not pointing to prod, and then we then cloned that sandbox 18 times in no matter 24 hours. And that would have before taking us like a month. And so now we didn't even lose a week of development time.
Right.
online, we had a question about naming conventions. Danny, thank you for sharing your article. I'll put it on the wrap-up notes, so everybody here in the room has them. And also, like I said, I came across Danny's posts on LinkedIn about flows. We'll put the summary of his series up there as well, because he has tons of knowledge to share. And I really appreciate you doing this. I know you're in Mexico right now, at least you're in our time zone. I think you're 2 hours earlier than we are. But it's been really great.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Yeah, go for it.
I always have questions.
Security question, especially around running flows in Experience Cloud and other public portals. If you need to access data and get records and stuff like that, so you noted the security risks of doing that within a flow. What about the concept that I've heard about having a less destructive, less active, less available flow? And when you have to do get records or some other function, call a subflow to do that and then bring the results back. Is that more secure?
I think it's a way to deal with security in flows. The thing is, you need to make sure that the parent flow is restricted, and you can do it either inside the flow itself or in a subflow. Because if you pass a variable or a collection of accounts, like this example, back to the parent flow, so it's the same thing, right? You need to make sure that what's available on the exposed flow is as restricted as possible. And one method is to manage it in a subflow. Another method is just managing inside the flow itself. So it's a method, but it's a way.
I almost think that having another flow that does your gets might make that flow too permissive, because now it's gonna carry multiple use cases. Now I have to get all the fields all the time because I don't know how I'm gonna use it. But if you do it within the flow, like Danny just said, then you can really just say, no, I just need these 5 fields versus these 10 fields. It's an interesting scenario.
Yeah, because the subflow, for it to be efficient, it'll almost be like an invocable action, something you'd want to call from other places. Because if you're only going to use it for one use case, to Ronnie's point, but then it's one, you just want to do it in the original flow.
But it goes back to your comment, Marlene. At the end of the day, it's about users and permissions. Still is, like, every time we talk security, you're gonna go back to who's accessing and for what. Because if you fix that, then you don't have the rest of the conversation.
And that's a painful conversation. Right? Like, especially in an old org, like switching over, like even in our org now, we're battling, the restructuring of roles and profiles. We're not, it's an ongoing effort. But the project that we did now was perfect because we were introducing new users into Salesforce. It was like starting from the ground up essentially, and incorporating them with our care agent, which existed, but it gave us that opportunity. And now it's almost like a proof of concept, right? So we can sell that to the business and have them align with us more closely to then start changing everything else. But yeah, permissioning and all that stuff, I would say that's at the beginning of your journey. You need to have a plan for that because you can end up taking shortcuts, and that's where you then become vulnerable, in my opinion.
So I had a question regarding the flow security, and I guess I'm having a hard time getting my head around why is it important? Obviously it is, but it's just not clicking for me. Your example, forget the gentleman's name online. Danny, his example on the community where he went into, I guess, some sort of debugger, we're a debugger. And you could read all the record, you could read all the fields, even though they weren't being displayed in the UI. Okay, boom, that just clicks for me. Now I understand why it's important from an Experience Cloud standpoint. But what do we switch on the inside? What's a simple reason, a simple example why I need to stop using the system, godlike permission on all my record trigger flows? I mean, I just don't see how it could hurt.
Well, think about it this way: from the outside in, that's seen as stealing information, right? what's gonna stop somebody internally from stealing information? It's the same concept,
You're
right?
assuming there's no internal threat.
Correct, right? And so let's say, and we have a separate org for HR, but let's say that HR, or any other, private, group is sharing your Salesforce, and there's a flow that's getting information there, and there's only specific fields that should be shown to someone. But now they see everything. They see what you make per year, blah, 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 and
Personal
because they're smart enough to go back in.
So is this more relevant in like screen flows?
No.
So I'm trying to understand, how could somebody, even a really smart, let's say like salesperson, screw around with one of my record trigger flows and see something they should
They
want access to?
pull all the accounts, not only theirs. Maybe they only have access to theirs. Now they'll be able to get all the accounts. Now they have access to information that they shouldn't. And they're doing it in a console because that's a debug on the browser.
So you can just like, you can be on an account and if there's flows running in the background, you can do something similar to your browser and see.
It's a
the
browser
information.
feature.
It doesn't, it's
Oh,
not
okay.
limited to a site.
It's a browser feature. It's there.
Because Lightning is running multiple components on a record page, potentially, there's auto components, potentially Lightning components. There's,
If I went to like Chrome and went to inspect,
correct.
and then I could see stuff that maybe I
And
shouldn't.
to be fair, that's with any browser, right? They offer the same.
Guys, I will just say that record triggered flows don't have God mode. This is only for screen flows.
Right.
Record triggered flow is based on user context, so the user must have the based on system context. Sorry.
It's for auto
I
launch
have it
flows,
on me.
right?
Even limiting by record types, because you can have the scenario where one user has access to 20 record types, another one only has access to one. Just by accident, by lack of somebody not doing something, all of a sudden, we have a scenario where we have people who have access to a whole bunch of patient data and some people have access to just a little. And we focus it by record type because a PHI breach is expensive on that.
Yes, I understand. And trust me, I'm aware of field level security and record level security. I mean, I have the sharing and visibility cert, so I understand all that. I'm just trying to understand, how does flow, if it's not done right, lead to vulnerabilities? But don't let me keep, I'll
Because
say
it's
not done right,
convenient,
that's the
and
key.
when it's convenient, some people can leave it in the ignorant mode. We call it go mode, and then people
I
can do
would
that.
say it's just an APEX, you can say with sharing, and that's better practice. Or you can say without sharing. God mode is without sharing.
Okay.
So you're letting everything be open all the time. Right? And I know not too long ago, a friend sent me a solution document that they were thinking about implementing. They had every single object public read write. What are you doing? This organization is a nonprofit international collecting donations from high value individuals. Please don't do this. And so, but it was easy.
It's a common problem, especially for smaller companies that don't have. I mean, most of my clients are not Hertz size, right? And they're maybe 100 users.
But it's
Yeah.
That's about, yeah, because you don't open.
But I'll also say this, and it's not related to both, but when you don't do a proper, user role profile process, like I can have more access than I know. And if I come to know that, for example, there's Salesforce Inspector plugin on Chrome. I can do queries using that tool. If I know how to query, guess what? Now I can query the whole database because I have this extra access. So again, the focus is always on, don't take the fast way because, yeah, sure, you get the faster, but then, if there's a breach or something, that's gonna be a problem, right? Because you're gonna double the hours of having to respond to that than if you would have just spent designing.
I have a client that the VP doesn't like multi-factor authentication. So he's told the org not to use it.
Wow.
And
He should be.
because it's hard to, pick up your phone.
Yeah, look at it and press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And knock yourself out.
But there's not much data on that from Salesforce.
If I may, Mark,
Yeah, some of those before, but case in point, it's always the human interaction that creates this kind of conversation, which is interesting, because.
Happy, were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say another reason that you want to enforce the individual user security in the flows is you have to take into account also that if somebody does click on a phishing email or something of that sort where they do get compromised, do you want them to have access to everything now that they're in the system? So once they have that quote unquote authentication or authorization, should they, you know, have free reign to do whatever they want in your system? And that's kind of where it comes in.
That's a good point.
So we've had really great discussion. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Everybody that's online, you guys are welcome to stick around. I am gonna stop the recording and then we're gonna move on to doing some swag. Danny, thank you so much. And again, you guys are welcome to stick around. We find the stop recording.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.